Welcome from the Scottish Greens to our event marking the anniversary on the referendum on whether Scotland should be an independent country. We have the Scottish Greens co-leaders here today, Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater, responding to videos that have been sent in by our members and activists from all over Scotland, with some of their visions, green visions for Scotland's future. You can find out more about our campaign for a Green Yes at greenyes.scot, where you can also sign up and pledge to give a regular donation to help us take our vision for Scotland's future to as many people as possible. So, the 18th of September 2014 was 6 years ago now. It feels a lot longer. It's thought of as one of those where were you moments. So I'd like to ask our co-leaders where you both were at that time. Patrick, I imagine you would have been at the count, were you?
Well, I was first of all at the count in Glasgow, and then I had to head through to Edinburgh for the big results there, and there were sort of media spots throughout the night as well. And I guess I had really mixed feelings, because for me, you know, I was really impressed at the campaign. It only really felt toward the end of the campaign that I allowed myself to really think in my heart of hearts, maybe we've done it. And so, you know, seeing the results come in and realizing that hadn't quite happened, but still such an incredible increase in the pro-independence case throughout the length of that campaign, you know, there was room for hope, even though I obviously wasn't happy at the result. There was definitely room for hope, because it still felt as though there was momentum to build on.
And Lorna, where were you 6 years ago?
So in 2014, on the day of the referendum, I wasn't involved in politics at that time. I was not a member of any political party. I had no political affiliations, and I was working on a tidal energy machine in Orkney. And I, along with some of my colleagues, got on a plane that morning to fly back to Edinburgh to be able to vote in the referendum. So I wasn't particularly involved in politics, but I knew it was really important to vote. So I came down and voted. I voted yes. And because I hadn't been active in the campaign, I didn't think that much about the result. But a gnawing feeling of disappointment then and melancholy came over me over the next few weeks. And it felt like we missed an opportunity, like something wonderful had passed us by. And 2 weeks after that date, I joined the Scottish Green Party, because I thought we can't let an opportunity like that go again. And I want to be involved. I want to help make this happen.
And now you're co-leader of the party. Patrick, there was quite a few people joined just after the result, wasn't there?
Quite a few is a bit of an understatement. I think way before we were seeing formal results coming in, our membership systems were already crashing. We were being overwhelmed with the number of new memberships coming in. That was happening to us. The SNP obviously saw a dramatic increase in their membership as well. And I think there was a great many people who were watching the results and thinking, I need to do something else now. I need to stay involved, stay connected, not just to this constitutional debate about independence, but a lot of people feeling that politics was alive. Politics was something they were participating in, and they didn't want to lose that. So again, that sense of renewed energy in our political landscape was another reason why the disappointment at the no result was balanced by a bit of enthusiasm and a bit of energy and optimism about how this might change our political landscape more generally.
Mm-hmm. And certainly it has felt like a long 6 years, but we've seen in recent times 7 opinion polls now in a row favouring Scotland going its own way. So that's 7 in a row. I remember we had 1 before the 2014 vote that caused quite a bit of a stir, but we've now had 7 in a row. So I guess, I mean, it's a bit of an obvious question, but does that give you a renewed sense of hope, Patrick? And, you know, why do you think those opinion polls are starting to shift now?
I mean, obviously, it's a sign of hope. I think it's also a sign that post the long saga of the Brexit chaos, more people are shifting in the direction of no to yes than the other direction. It's not that nobody's going in that other direction, but the balance is clearly shifting our way. you know, in many ways, I think a lot of the undecided people, a lot of the people who were maybe aye, maybe no last time, who's starting to see the case for voting yes, it's as much about looking at the UK government and thinking, what a shambles. You know, if there was the slightest prospect over the horizon of a semi-competent UK government, maybe this wouldn't be happening in quite the same way or at quite this speed. I think we'd still get there in time. But certainly the incompetence and the arrogant contempt that the UK government is showing, I think, is speeding more and more people in the direction of thinking, it's time to do this.
I mean, I think that the focus has to remain on the people who maybe haven't yet been convinced by the case. Do you think it's important, Lorna, to focus on the why?
Absolutely. So I don't think that we can convince people that independence is a good idea until we create for them a vision of what Scotland can be, of what that actually means, what's going to be different. Because something I see people say all the time is, oh, well, we could elect bad governments in Scotland too. It's not going to be any different. And to explain that the situation that we have in Westminster is not a result of one bad government. It's the result of broken democratic structures. It's the result of an unelected House of Lords that still has hereditary lords and bishops in it. It's the result of a first past the post electoral system. It's the result of not having a written constitution, of having nothing but a gentleman's agreement to protect your human rights, your civil rights, your democracy. We can see how when charlatans get elected into the government, how quickly that can fall apart. And we can explain how that could be different in Scotland, how our rights could be protected by a written constitution, how our democracy can be improved by proportional representation and ensuring proper representation of people all over Scotland. And by telling this story, we can create the vision for the new country that we want to be. And by making it real in people's minds, we can kind of bring them along on our journey with us. And I mean, I'm very keen that we don't replicate what happened with Brexit, with this sort of national 52-48 divide. Sure, that would win us independence, but we'd end up a divided and bitter country against ourselves. Let's keep talking about what we want Scotland to be. Let's keep building support. Let's build a common vision of what we want Scotland to be. And let's get 60%, 70% of people in Scotland behind that vision. That would be really transformational.
Okay, and it's funny you should say that, because actually the first set of videos that we're going to show really are about this basic point. And we'd asked Scottish Greens members and activists to send in videos of their visions of what Scotland could really do as a new nation. So as I mentioned, the first couple, these are from Chris and Morag. Let's have a look at what they have to say.
I'm looking forward to having a politics that the people of Scotland vote for, and not the exact opposite.
I'm looking forward to independent Scotland so that we can increase our power to local communities and local decisions can be made by the people that it directly affects.
So that's Chris and Morag. These are about basic democracy, aren't they? The basic democratic case for Scotland having more control over its own affairs, having a more representative government. Lorna, I know you've touched on it already, but Westminster democracy has kind of frustrated you, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's completely broken. The fact that you can have a Tory government in power for the next 4 years and something like only 20% of people in the UK voted for them, it's tyranny by a minority. It's absolutely not the kind of democracy that we want. There's some exciting developments in democracy in Scotland. Not only do we have proportional representation in our parliament, we have it in all of our councils, and we also have a citizens' assembly in Scotland. So we're really pushing the boundaries on what functional democracy looks like, and this can be the basis for building a new country.
I mean, that democracy, that Westminster democracy, is actually, it's undergoing a change in itself, isn't it, Patrick? I know there's been quite a bit of a furore around the UK government's proposed internal market bill, and that's certainly been in the news in recent weeks.
Yeah, it's another example where if a government wants to do something really dangerous, make it sound really boring. The UK internal market bill sounds like such a dry technical measure. Actually, it's a profound threat to Scotland and to Wales and Northern Ireland as well. It's a profound threat to the Northern Ireland peace process. It's a threat to international law because the UK government acknowledges openly that it would break international law. It's a threat actually to the UK's own international reputation. If they're about to strike out on the world stage and be global Britain, they're asking potential trade partners to negotiate, knowing that you can't trust a word the UK government says. You can't even trust a word that it's signed its name to. Now, what this means also is that the Scottish government and the Scottish people can't trust the UK government. They're asking us to negotiate common frameworks, to enter into agreements between the governments about how to manage things that just make sense to deal with on a collective shared basis. Well, that's fine if it's genuine free negotiation, free agreement that you're free to change your mind about as well. But with this bill, they're basically saying, agree to this or we'll do it anyway. We're going to ask for your consent and then ignore your answer. And at the end of the day, they're going to take the power to overrule the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government on a whole host of devolved issues. One of the first policy areas mentioned in the Internal Market White Paper, the discussion paper that comes just before the bill, and it was consulted on very briefly right in the middle of the parliamentary recess. So the Scottish Parliament's committees couldn't even take evidence on it properly. One of the first policy areas is building regulations. Now, we all know as Greens, you need to have a really bold approach to the kind of buildings that we put up in order to make them more energy efficient, to reduce energy waste and to reduce fuel poverty, hopefully to eliminate it. That's been devolved since the very beginning of devolution. Even before devolution, it was separately administered. It wasn't controlled in a single unitary UK-wide fashion. So the fact that they're trying to take these powers over long-standing devolved policy areas should be utterly unacceptable. And I think the more people who find out about this, the more people again will say the UK is a fundamental threat to Scotland's ability to govern itself, and we need out.
Yeah, and of course the alternative to that Brexit Britain, if you like, is the constructive role that Scotland could play as a independent country, and that was the theme from some of our videos as well. Having Scotland with its own seat at the European table. Here's David and Marion on this.
I look forward to Scotland being an independent country once more, with us Greens leading the way, and this country leading the way for climate change and renewable energy and so forth and so on. It's a beautiful, beautiful country with a beautiful landscape, beautiful people, with so much to offer this world, so much more than what it's giving out there right now. Deserves so much more. Here's to Scotland.
I'm excited about Scottish independence because we'll have the powers to confront the climate emergency and our chronic social inequalities. By investing in Scotland's state-of-the-art marine energy industry, we'll create tens of thousands of skilled jobs, help power our nation and tackle the climate crisis. And our new National Investment Bank will help pay for this green transition. Unlike other banks, it will put all of us first. Now, that's a future I can say yes to.
So, Lorna, Marion, in her video there, mentioned marine energy. And as someone who works in this industry, can you just talk a little bit about Scotland's potential for renewables in Europe?
Absolutely. So we're very lucky in Scotland, very fortunate. Scotland, little Scotland, has 25% of all the renewable energy in Europe. We already produce 74%, that's an old number, so probably more, of our domestic energy demand from renewable energy. And we've only exploited a very small part of what's actually out there. With investment and development, we could supply not only our own energy needs, but export energy to Europe as well. So I'm working in tidal energy, which has enormous potential in Scotland. But a bigger part of that is how that connects us to Europe. So the project I'm working on has been funded by the EU because the whole point was to bring together a European supply chain. This turbine has gearboxes from the Czech Republic, generators from Finland, pitching systems from Germany, powertrains from Germany, control systems from Sweden, bearings from France. All of these countries of Europe working together to build the world's largest tidal turbine, which we will install in Scotland because we're the ones with the tidal resource, and then export that energy theoretically out to the UK and out to Europe. If we're not part of that, then that can't be done. Working together with the other nations of Europe will allow us to do great things that we cannot do on our own. And part of that is shift all of Europe, not just ourselves, to a green and sustainable energy system.
And clearly we're not doing that as part of the UK.
The UK government has no interest in that at all. As you know, they've put all their eggs in the Hinkley Point basket, which is a large nuclear power station, which will be in the south of England. Which, they're buying the energy at a very expensive rate, so it's not even cheap energy. And they're, if you ask me, doing that deliberately so as to avoid investing in Scotland, because I don't think Westminster thinks it's in their interest for the people of Scotland to know that we are sitting on this valuable resource. They would much rather they controlled the energy.
Another frequent theme of our videos has been how decentralisation could continue beyond Holyrood and really empower our communities. So here we have Chick, James and the Scottish Greens lead candidate for the south of Scotland, Laura Moody.
Hi, I'm Chick Hosey from Clackmannshire and Stirling branch of the Scottish Greens. I'm looking forward the most to independence, as it should hopefully facilitate a greater level of participative democracy. I think I see independence as being the greatest community empowerment project ever undertaken in Scotland, and I hope to see greater community control over decision making and how resources are deployed within different neighbourhoods. I see this as being one of the great benefits and the thorough democratisation of Scottish society.
Through independence, we can prove that we can be a better democracy. We no longer will have the House of Lords, we'll no longer have first past the post, we will have an opportunity also to massively decentralise government in Scotland and do something that's quite normal around the rest of the EU, which is having good municipal government, autonomy and power in local hands.
I'm looking forward to an independent Scotland, to bring power not just to Edinburgh, but to every part of Scotland. From here in Galloway, to Shetland, Stornoway and Dunbar.
So Patrick, what do you think this better democracy that James mentioned looks like?
Well, I suppose it's the other side of the coin, really. You know, Lorna was talking earlier about Scotland's internationalism, working together with other European countries. You know, the flip side of that is that a lot of European countries are much more decentralised than Scotland is in terms of the power that local communities have to make decisions about their own affairs. You know, it is normal in European countries for local taxation, for example, to be decided locally. In a country like Germany, if Angela Merkel tried to tell local councils how much local tax they can raise, she'd end up in court and she would lose. Andy Whiteman at the moment is trying to embed the power of local democracy into Scots law. That's a convention, a European-wide convention that we're nominally signed up to, but we're not really implementing it yet. So we're trying to put that through the Scottish Parliament at the moment. And the Scottish Government certainly needs to be pushed beyond its comfort zone. Greens have scored some good successes at trying to give a bit more power to local level in relation to taxation. That's, taking longer because of COVID. A lot of things have been slowed down because of COVID, of course, but we're still absolutely committed to this notion that it should go without saying that people can participate in decisions about their own community. And that's one of the things that overcomes the mistrust and the sense of disconnect that people very often feel when politics feels like it's being done to you rather than by and with your own community. So, it comes back to that sense of energy and connection that the IndieRef generated, more and more people wanting to be part of politics. Well, let's give local communities some power. Let's give local communities the kind of power that would be normal in so many other of those small northern independent European countries that Scotland loves to compare itself to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, thinking of ourselves as a different country, another theme that's come out of the videos has been creating a more caring society, a fairer Scotland. Here, Jerome talks about the hopes for his not yet born child, while Fiona and our lead candidate for the Highlands and Islands, Ariane Burgess, both mention how we could better look after people.
In just a few weeks, I'm going to be a dad. I want my daughter to grow up in a country that's inclusive and welcoming to all, that helps everyone become their best selves, because neither poverty nor lack of opportunity would hold them back. I want my daughter to be part of a society that helps save us all from climate breakdown and works to create a better world for all.
I'd also like to see us be an independent country so that we can take care of our most vulnerable.
I want to see an independent Scotland responding to the climate emergency, free to choose what it wants to do and chart its course, and able to look after people who are struggling after this pandemic.
So Lorna, why do you think people have got so little faith that a caring society can happen in the UK? I mean, after all, this is the country that created the NHS and the welfare state.
Well, I think that the NHS is actually a really good example of this. And we can see the differences between NHS Scotland and NHS down in England. In 2012, the Parliament in Westminster voted for the NHS in England to be allowed to be partially privatised and opened that door up. And you can see the results of that privatisation. You can see the disastrous outsourced to Serco test and trace program that they have down in England. It means that their testing system is such a disaster, they're telling English people to use Scottish postcodes in order to get testing. Our system up here, our NHS, is still publicly owned. Our test and trace app is actually hosted by the NHS and not a private company, and it's working much better. It's not perfect, nothing's perfect, but it's working much better. Public health should be a public service. In Scotland, we're also talking about having a national care service in addition to a national health service, because we all know we have a care crisis in our country. And that was also an example from COVID, where care homes were very dangerous places to be because there wasn't a way to roll out advice and regulation and PPE nationally, because they're all owned by private companies. If you had a national care service like your National Health Service, you could use those same mechanisms that make sure that hospitals are up to date with the latest rules and regulations, that they have all the equipment they need for care systems. So we can see absolutely in Scotland how keeping public services public has meant that we have a more caring society. Throwing them to the wolves of profit-making corporations is exactly how you end up with a society that's interested only in profit and not on people's well-being. So in Scotland, we've already diverged from England on this path. And I think that the people of Scotland can see that if they care about one another and their neighbours and their own health and well-being, that we need to keep diverging along that path and go our own way.
And of course, the internal market bill, which Patrick was talking about earlier, does put a lot of that public ownership in Scotland under threat, because it opens all of those services up to commercial interests if the Tories wanted to. Patrick, we've heard a lot about a lot of talk around the world about a well-being economy. It's a kind of different model, I guess, from the traditional welfare state, perhaps. But what do you think that means in practice, the well-being economy?
Well, it's interesting. It's one of these phrases that's been floating around a lot more, and I think we can make a case as Greens for a very clear meaning for what a well-being economy is. The trouble with it, though, is that it's open to interpretation. People can use that phrase without really meaning very much by it. Just recently, one of the Scottish government's economic reports, they have a habit of commissioning bankers to write economic reports for them. This one got pretty well trashed. But it talked about well-being. When you actually drill down into it, there was no real detail about what it meant, and the word well-being was used to justify really bog standard, conventional, plain vanilla GDP kind of economic policies. From a Green point of view, we've always challenged the notion of GDP as the dominant issue. We've challenged the idea that you measure narrow things like GDP growth. That's just a measure of the transactions in the economy. It doesn't tell you how is economic wealth being generated and how is it being shared. It doesn't tell you where's the environmental harm, who's bearing that, and who's bearing the social harm. So something like care services that Lorna was just talking about, you know, our current economy values them very poorly because they don't generate those GDP transactions. They generate a huge amount of well-being. They're critical to our quality of life. Those kind of services, that kind of work should be a well-paid, rewarding career. And we have an economy at the moment that's allowed it to be minimum wage work. That's absurd. That's a sick set of values for a society that ought to be about looking after one another's health and happiness and well-being. So from my point of view, from a green point of view, a well-being economy has to be making a break from that GDP-obsessed economy that's been dominant for so long and starting to place value on other things, whether that's around the value of the natural environment, the value of people's health, you know, the value of the urban environment as well, which is being trashed just as much as our precious rural spaces are being damaged in environmental terms. So, yeah, the Scottish Government is, again, talking about well-being, but we absolutely need to start pinning down definitions. Otherwise, it will just become jargon that's used as cover for conventional centre-right, GDP-focused economic policies.
Yeah. And talking about looking after people, it'll be no surprise at all that immigration also featured strongly in our videos that people sent in. Here's Jeff and our lead candidate for Glasgow, Kim Long.
I'm looking forward to an independent Scotland that can set its own immigration policy so that international students who want to continue to stay in Scotland after education and contribute to the country can do so. As it is, right now we've got a foreign government 300 miles out with Scotland's borders that continues to tell us after our studies we're not welcome.
What I'm looking forward to in an independent Scotland is our own new immigration system with justice and dignity at its heart.
It's very clear. Patrick, how on earth did we get to this stage in the UK where immigrants are treated like this?
It's been a long time coming. It's been a long time building. You know, I remember even as a student back in the 90s, and this wasn't even the beginning of the story, you know, huge controversies around immigration bills. This has been going on for decades, for generations, this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric and this view of some in the political centre ground that if there's a threat of racism or kind of far-right sentiment building, you have to lead into that and give people a little bit more of what they want, rather than challenging the basis of it. And it's been leaned into so long and so hard that, you know, we've now been bombarded with anti-immigrant sentiment, deeply racist sentiment across much of the media for many, many years. I actually find it heartening that despite that relentless torrent of anti-immigrant propaganda that people are exposed to, there is still, in a lot of communities, a strong desire to reach out and lend a hand and to empathise and show compassion with whether people around the world who are suffering or with people here who are being treated as less than human by an immigration and asylum system that just, you know, wants rid of people. I think Scotland's ability to have an immigration and asylum system that's grounded in compassion would be one of the most important steps that we would take when we become independent. And the UK's reluctance or unwillingness to even talk about even just providing asylum housing on a standard that we would be proud of. We're not even allowed to do that. That's held over to the UK government and privatised to their outsourced companies, whether it's the Mears Group or Serco or Orchard and Shipman or whoever it is at any particular time. It's unacceptable. And with independence, we wouldn't need to accept it.
And there's that deep-rooted sentiment, that kind of racism that has been allowed to flourish because it hasn't been challenged by governments. So that's kind of Patrick's talked about, and that does still exist in some ways in Scotland. And Lorna, you're a new Scot yourself, but you've often described how your experience has been perhaps a bit different from other immigrants.
Oh, wildly different. So I'm white, middle-class, English-speaking immigrant. I mean, I'm hardly an immigrant at all in the sense of the sort of prejudice and challenges that would be normal and or normal experience. I was still stung by Theresa May's citizens of nowhere comment, how devalued she made us feel, those of us who weren't born here. That kind of blood and soil nationalism, I think, is really dangerous. I'm so pleased that in Scotland, we're cultivating a more civic version of that, where it's about how you participate in society. It's not about where you were born or where your ancestors were born. It's about participating in your community. I did a podcast recently with Nadia Kanyanji, who is one of our lead candidates for Glasgow, where we were talking about this and how terrifying and hurtful the Windrush scandal has been, to how people come to the UK and have contributed so much and then are treated like garbage, or people now who are escaping war, who are escaping climate crisis, are being treated terribly there's no safe passage to the UK, and as a result people are drowning and dying trying to get here to be safe. And then once people are here, they're often treated brutally, as Patrick referred to. They're not, we don't provide adequate housing. We basically don't treat people like humans at all. We can all act in horror at the conditions in the camps and jails that Donald Trump has on his southern border. The conditions in our detention centers are not better. We are not better. We also treat human beings in this inhuman way, and that absolutely must change. The UK rhetoric on this is dangerous. It's costing lives. It's something we've got to look at differently in Scotland.
And I suppose, I mean, when you tell people that you support Scottish independence and they hear your accent, are people surprised by that?
Generally, no. It's not something I've ever had a problem with. Thank goodness. I always imagined there was kind of a sort of feeling in politics that I would hit because of not having the right accent, but fortunately that hasn't been the case, and people of Scotland have always been very welcoming to me.
Yeah, I think this is a perception perhaps from down south or elsewhere that they assume that Scottish independence is going to be driven by that. But I think we've been clear that it isn't. I think last up, we've got some videos left, but they really sum up they sort of coalesce around a lot of the points that we've already been talking about. So first up, we've got another one of our Highlands and Islands candidates, Anne, talking about her community renewables project. We've got our West of Scotland lead candidate, Carolyn Scrimgeour, talking of hopes of a better future. And Sean, lastly, who I think sums up the Green case for independence pretty neatly.
One of the things that I'm looking forward to with independence is being able to have more small wind turbines like ours. We installed this 12 years ago and it's going really well, but sadly the UK government has stopped other families like ours doing the same.
The thing I'm most looking forward to about an independent Scotland is just the hope for a better future, which we feel very far away from now, but the opportunity and the chance to make a greener, fairer, outward-looking Scotland is one that we have to seize.
So I'm hopeful of a Scotland that's confident and kind, that's self-aware and is respectful of others, is welcoming, is adventurous, inclusive, innovative, brave, is caring about social values, about our environment, takes action on climate, as our children hope for a future, and embraces all those who come to our great country and choose to call Scotland home.
So I know the video quality was a little bit low resolution there, but can't you just feel the hope and optimism coming out of Sean? Lorna, I know you've talked a lot about hope and you're keen to sort of cling on to the hope in these dark times. That we still have time to tackle the climate emergency and build something new.
We do, we absolutely do. And that's because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of things that we could do right away that would make a massive difference. Things like stopping subsidizing oil and gas industry, We spend an enormous amount of taxpayer money subsidizing these industries that are killing our planet and our ecosystem. We can stop doing that. We can redirect that money to other projects. We can stop road widening, stop airport expansion. People always act as though dealing with the climate crisis is going to cost money. No, we can stop spending money actively destroying the planet. That's the first step. That's really low-hanging fruit. We can also continue with the change in town and city priorities that we've seen during COVID, making it safe for every child in Scotland to ride their bike to school. That will not only improve well-being, but it would dramatically reduce our carbon footprint in our cities and reduce air pollution at the same time. Again, low-hanging fruit. We've started. All we need to do is keep going. We could invest in warm homes all over Scotland, upgrade insulation, improve heating systems to be more energy efficient, and emit less CO2 into the atmosphere. That would be a cost-neutral proposition. We could save money on energy costs all over Scotland. We could save people getting sick and dying from living in cold, inadequate housing. All of these things are low-hanging fruit. We could tackle them right away. And while we're doing those things, we can come up with a plan to deal with the more challenging, longer-term issues, like reallocating land use in Scotland. Things like grouse moors, which take up so much space in Scotland, but do almost nothing for either our economy or our environment. We can plan for a transition away from oil and gas. We can say, right, as of that date in 2028, we are no longer digging up oil and gas, and we can repurpose our assets. We can go, well, this is how many quaysides, this is how many manufacturing businesses, this is how many engineers, this is how many technicians. We need to retrain, repurpose to build clean energy systems. It can all be done. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. It just needs the will and a plan.
And Patrick, Lorna's talked about that low-hanging fruit, but beyond that, there's a real sense that Scotland becoming independent would not only help, but be the start of something, isn't there?
Absolutely. It should never be seen as a destination, but as the beginning of a new and more hopeful journey. And it is, I think, in many ways a special responsibility of the Greens, because we are often the kind of party that wants to sound the alarm bells about big problems. We also have to balance that by being positive and finding hope. And hope can be difficult in these times. You look at the climate emergency, but we have to say, as Lorna was just doing, here are the solutions, here are the things we can do. You look at the ecological crisis around the world, we have to say, here are the ways that we can let nature regrow. When people feel, very often isolated and atomized in our modern society, we have to talk about how we can rebuild community connections and a real sense of community mutual reliance. You talk about the way the rise of the far right and racism. We have to talk about that compassion that is still so strong and how we can work on that and cultivate that and express it in our society. And you look at the Brexit agenda and a centralising power grab government. We have to talk about independence, not just as a flag waving exercise, but as something really positive we can do, giving Scotland the ability to turn itself into the country that we know we can be. There's that old slogan, old phrase, work as if you live in the early days of a better nation. Well, if we do this, and I think we can achieve independence, we'll have to work even harder than we ever have before, as though we live in the early days of a better nation. But we're up to that challenge, and I'm convinced that in the near future, in the not too distant future, we're going to take on that extraordinary task of building that better nation.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. Much needed hope, I think, as well on this anniversary. And to everyone who's watching, wherever you are, cheers. Remember that you can find out more about our campaign for a Green Yes at greenyes.scot, and please consider donating to the campaign to build a new, fairer, greener Scotland. The work starts now. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.